I had exactly 10 seconds to make a choice. Option 1. Let the security team tase him, which, given his blood loss, would stop his heart instantly. Or option 2. Step into that cage with a man who was ready to kill everyone in the room. It was a choice between my safety and his life. Logic told me to run. Survival told me to hide. But when his eyes locked onto mine, I didn't run. I stepped forward. And just like that, I crossed the line of no return. Welcome to the family, my loves. You are tuning into Afro Soul Love Tales, the only place where passion meets the edge of danger. We are about to embark on a journey so intense you might forget to breathe. If you are ready to stand with us, to protect the ones you love no matter the cost, I need you to smash that subscribe button right now. Do not just watch, join the family. Hit the bell so you never miss a heartbeat, because what happens next, well, you'll have to subscribe to find out. The emergency room of St. Jude's Memorial did not hum, it vibrated. It was a nervous system under siege, a ceaseless, discordant symphony of suffering. Monitors chirped their digital birdsong, gurneys rattled like old bones over linoleum, and the hiss of oxygen tanks provided a rhythm to the panic. But tonight, that predictable anxiety had been shattered. A violent dissonance had erupted in the center of the department, turning the sterile air thick with the metallic tang of adrenaline and fresh blood. Trauma Room 4 had ceased to be a place of healing. It had transformed into a jagged wound in the heart of the hospital. A widening perimeter of terrified staff and useless, posturing security guards formed a semicircle around the glass-walled bay, their shadows stretching long and distorted under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. They were frozen, caught between their job descriptions and their survival instincts. Inside the bay, the source of their terror stood backed into the corner. He moved not like a desperate man, but like a wounded apex predator waiting for the pack to make a mistake. His name, though none of them knew it yet, was Taeju. Even in ruin, he was a masterpiece of lethal elegance. His bespoke white dress shirt, woven from silk that cost more than a nurse's yearly salary, was now a ruin, soaked through with a spreading inkblot of red. It clung to his chest, rising and falling with ragged, shallow breaths. In his right hand, white-knuckled and steady, he gripped a jagged shard of a broken saline bottle. It wasn't a weapon, it was an extension of his will. He was losing blood at a catastrophic rate, the pallor of his skin turning a ghostly, sickly gray that contrasted sharply with the midnight darkness of his hair, which hung in damp, chaotic strands over his forehead. But his eyes were the terrifying part. They were burning with a lucid, freezing focus. There was no madness there, only calculation. He was doing the math on how many of them he could take with him before he fell. Dr. Mercer, the chief resident whose ego took up more space than the trauma bays, was red-faced and sputtering, his authority evaporating against the raw, kinetic threat inside the room. "Taser him," Mercer screamed, his voice cracking, a high-pitched sound that grated against the nerves. "Put him down before he bleeds out on my floor. I want him restrained now." The security guards hesitated, their hands hovering over their belts, fingers twitching near their tasers. They sensed what Mercer was too arrogant to see. The man in the room wasn't just a patient. He was a force of nature. Taeju swung the glass shard in a violent, disciplined arc, creating a barrier of air that no one dared cross. A guttural warning ripped from his throat, a sound that wasn't English, a language of pure command that none of the suburban security team understood. Sonia stood in the shadows of the nurse's station, her dark blue scrubs blending into the dim alcove. She watched the scene with a stillness that was unnatural, a statue carved from obsidian and patience. At 28, Sonia possessed a beauty that was often overlooked because of the formidable wall she kept around her heart. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical style, highlighting the sharp elegance of her cheekbones and the deep, soulful intelligence of her eyes. But those eyes held a heavy, weary depth, the look of someone who had seen humanity at its absolute breaking point long before she ever set foot in a civilian hospital. She wasn't looking at the spectacle, she was reading the tactical reality. She clocked it instantly, her mind processing the data with the speed of a veteran triage officer. The man wasn't psychotic. He wasn't on drugs. He was cornered. The security guards were posturing, terrified of the lethal intent radiating from the bleeding man. But Sonia saw what they missed. She saw the way Taeju favored his left side, shielding a specific point just above his hip. She saw the defensive angle of his stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced. She saw him checking the reflection in the glass, scanning for blind spots behind him. He wasn't attacking, he was fortifying. He was a soldier waiting for reinforcements that were never coming. "Stand down," Sonia said. Her voice was low, barely a whisper, but it cut through the chaotic noise of the ER like a scalpel through silk. She moved out of the shadows, walking past Dr. Mercer with a stride that didn't ask for permission. Mercer blinked, his face flushing a deeper shade of indignant purple. "Nurse, do not enter that room." "That is a direct order," he barked, his hand shooting out to grab her arm. Sonia didn't stop. She didn't even look at him. She simply shook him off with a subtle twist of her shoulder, a movement so fluid it made Mercer stumble. Her gaze was locked on the man in trauma like a laser sight. "He is going into hypovolemic shock," Sonia stated calmly, her voice carrying a terrifying authority. "Doctor, if you tase him now, the cardiac stress combined with the blood loss will kill him instantly." "I am going in." "You'll be fired," Mercer shouted at her back. "If he hurts you, it's on your own head." The silence that fell over the trauma bay as Sonia pushed open the sliding glass door was heavy enough to choke on. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the hallway. The atmosphere inside the room was different, denser, hotter. It smelled of copper, rubbing alcohol, and aggressive, radiating fear. Taeju whipped the glass shard toward her, the motion a blur of speed despite his condition. "Get back," he rasped. His English was heavily accented, deep and gravelly, his chest heaving with the Herculean effort to stay conscious. The blood was dripping steadily from the gunshot wound, pooling on the linoleum in a grim rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. Sonia stopped exactly 3 feet away. It was the kill zone, the distance where a strike was inevitable, but she didn't flinch. She raised her empty hands slowly, palms open, fingers spread. She didn't look at the weapon. She didn't look at the blood. She looked directly into his eyes, which were dilated and frantic, swimming in a haze of pain and adrenaline. And then she saw it. Peeking out from the blood-soaked collar of his ruined shirt was a tattoo. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough to stop her heart for a fraction of a second. It was a specific, stylized coil of a black serpent, the ink fading slightly at the edges, a mark of the old world, a brand she hadn't seen since her time working the unauthorized, underground clinics in the sprawling port cities overseas. It was a ghost story told in the underworld. It was a brand of absolute loyalty, but more than that, it was a memory. It triggered a flash in her mind: smoke, rain, and the face of someone she had lost years ago, someone who had worn a similar mark before vanishing into the night. The stakes shifted instantly. This wasn't just a patient. This was a link to a past she had buried deep. "You're losing the fight," Sonia said softly, her voice steady, an anchor in the storm of his panic. "And it's not the enemy that's killing you. It's gravity." "Let me stop the bleeding," the man sneered, his grip tightening on the glass until his knuckles turned the color of bone. "No doctors. No police. They are already here." Sonia realized then that his paranoia wasn't madness. It was intelligence. He wasn't afraid of the treatment. He was afraid of being pinned down when the hunters arrived. He knew something they didn't. The stalemate was absolute. In seconds, the security team would rush him, panic would take over, and they would kill him in the struggle. Sonia took a breath, reaching back into a locked drawer of her memory, pulling out a phrase she had learned in a basement triage center in Busan years ago. It was a shibboleth, a password meant to identify safe harbor in a world of wolves. She took a half step closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that only he could hear, shielding her lips from the onlookers outside the glass. "The tiger does not hunt when the mountain burns," she said. She spoke the words in flawless, native Korean. The effect was immediate and visceral. It was as if she had flipped a switch inside his soul. Taeju's eyes widened, the feral rage fracturing into confusion and sudden, desperate recognition. The glass shard wavered in his hand. It was a code, a specific, archaic phrase used by the inner circle of the old syndicates to signal a neutral party, a sanctuary. He looked at her, really looked at her, searching her face for the betrayal he expected, scanning her features for a trap. But he found only a calm, ironclad resolve. He saw a woman who stood in the fire without burning. "Who are you?" he whispered back, his voice trembling, the fight draining out of him as the blood loss finally claimed his balance. "I'm the one who keeps you alive until the fire goes out," Sonia replied, switching back to English, but keeping the cadence intimate, a secret language between them. "Urgent. Drop the glass. Give me your hand." The transition from standoff to surgery was a blur of motion that left the rest of the ER staff stunned. The glass shattered on the floor as Taeju slumped forward, the adrenaline finally giving way to the void. Sonia caught him. Her small frame strained under his dead weight, her muscles locking as she absorbed the impact of his collapse. She grunted with the effort but didn't buckle, guiding him onto the gurney with a tenderness that defied the violence of the moment. "I need a crash cart. 2 units of O-negative and a trauma tray now," she shouted. The command snapped the frozen staff back into action. The spell was broken, replaced by the mechanical urgency of saving a life. As she cut away the ruined shirt, her scissors slicing through the expensive silk, exposing the jagged entry wound just above his hip, Taeju's hand shot out. He gripped her wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a man in his condition. His fingers were cold, like ice from a deep freeze, but his grip was burning with fever. "Do not log me in," he wheezed, his eyes rolling back, fighting the darkness to stay locked on hers. "The system is watching." Sonia paused. The sensor on her digital chart was hovering over his wristband, ready to scan him into the hospital's mainframe. She looked at the monitor. His blood pressure was tanking, 80/50 and dropping. If she logged him into the central hospital network, his vitals, his location, and his description would be flagged to every agency and precinct in the city within seconds. If he was right, if he was being hunted from the inside, a digital footprint wasn't just data. It was a death sentence. She looked up. Through the glass, she saw Dr. Mercer standing at the nurse's station. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was on his phone, his hand cupped over his mouth, his eyes darting toward Trauma Room 4 with a nervous, guilty energy. A chill went down Sonia's spine. Mercer wasn't calling for a consult. He was making a report. The danger wasn't just coming, it was already coordinating with the staff. She looked back at Taeju. There was a vulnerability in his face now that stripped away the gangster exterior, leaving just a man terrified of dying alone in a sterile room. It was a look that triggered a fierce, protective instinct in her, something that went beyond her oath as a nurse. It was the same instinct that had kept her alive in the war zones, the ability to recognize who needed saving and who needed stopping. Before we see if Sonia makes the choice that will change her life forever, I need to welcome all the new family members who just joined us. Thank you. But listen, if you are reading this and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, what are you waiting for? This is about to get dangerous. We are going off the books. Smash that button so you don't get left behind when the lights go out. Sonia made her choice. She dropped the scanner. It clattered onto the metal tray, the sound swallowed by the noise of the machinery. "Off the books," she whispered, leaning close to his ear as she pressed a compression pad into the wound, her hands already slick with his blood. "But you have to stay with me. You don't get to die on my shift." A flicker of a smile, grim and pained, touched his lips. It was a ghost of charm, a hint of the man he was before the night tore him apart. "I am hard to kill," he murmured. The intimacy of the moment was sharp and sudden. Her hands were inside his open wound, stemming the flow of his life force. His life was entirely dependent on her discretion, her silence, her skill. As she worked, packing the wound and clamping the bleeder, the air between them charged with a strange, high-stakes electricity. This wasn't just patient and nurse anymore. They were co-conspirators. She could feel his eyes on her face, tracing her features as she worked, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was memorizing her. "My name is Taeju," He gasped out as the morphine drip finally began to take hold, his eyelids fluttering. "Sonia," she replied, not looking up as she threaded the needle, her focus absolute. "And you talk too much, Taeju." The reprieve was short-lived. 20 minutes later, the atmosphere in the ER shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a change in pressure, a silence that rippled from the front desk inward, like the tide receding before a tsunami. Sonia was cleaning her hands at the sink, the water turning pink as it swirled down the drain. She was watching Taeju's steadying rhythm on the monitor, her mind racing with questions about the tattoo, about the code, about the man lying on the table. Then, she saw them through the blinds. 2 men. They were dressed in dark suits that were too tailored for government work and too nondescript for corporate. They moved with a predatory efficiency that mimicked law enforcement but lacked the boredom of real cops. They didn't walk, they glided. They bypassed the triage nurse without a word, flashing badges that Sonia couldn't read from this distance, but she recognized the body language instantly. They scanned the room not like they were looking for a person to interview, but like they were clearing a sector to sanitize. They were hunters. Cleaners. Sonia's breath hitched. Taeju had been right. And Dr. Mercer? He was nowhere to be seen. He had cleared the deck for them. She wiped her hands dry, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She moved back to the bedside. Taeju was awake. His instincts, sharpened by a lifetime of looking over his shoulder, had pulled him out of the sedation. He saw the tension in her shoulders before she even spoke. "They are here," he stated. It wasn't a question. 2 men. West entrance. "They're sweeping the bays," Sonia said, keeping her voice level, though her pulse was thundering in her ears. She reached down and unlocked the wheels of his gurney. "They don't look like they're here to take a statement." Taeju tried to sit up, groaning as the fresh sutures pulled tight against his skin. "Leave me," he said, his voice hard, his eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce nobility. "If they find you helping me, they will burn this whole place down. You have done enough. Go." Sonia looked at him. Really looked at him. He was a criminal, a man of violence, a figure who likely had a ledger of sins longer than her arm. But in this room, under her care, he was a human being who had trusted her with his life when he trusted no one else. And there was something else, a spark in the way he looked at her, a desperate gratitude that terrified her more than the men with guns. He was willing to die to protect her from the consequences of saving him. "I don't abandon my patients," Sonia said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. She grabbed a pair of surgical shears from the tray and slid them into her pocket. The weight of the cold metal against her thigh was grounding. "And I definitely don't let people get executed in my trauma room." She reached up and killed the lights in the bay, plunging them into semi-darkness. The sudden shadow felt like a blanket, but it was thin protection against what was coming. "We need to move. Now." They moved through the shadows of the service corridors like ghosts, the hum of the hospital ventilation masking the sound of the gurney's wheels. Sonia navigated the labyrinth of St. Jude's with the ease of someone who practically lived there, her internal map guiding them away from the bright lights and toward the freight elevators used for biowaste and laundry. Taeju lay still, one hand pressed over his bandaged side, the other gripping the metal rail of the bed until his knuckles turned white. His eyes, sharp and alert despite the pain, scanned the ceiling mirrors and blind corners, reading the environment for threats Sonia couldn't see. "You are very good at this," he whispered, pain lacing his voice with a ragged edge. "Too good for a nurse." Sonia didn't look back. Her focus was entirely on the hallway ahead, her senses tuned to the frequency of danger. "I learned to triage in places where the hospitals were the first targets," she said tightly. "You learn to move fast, or you don't move at all." They reached the freight elevator. Sonia hammered the call button, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of her fist echoing her heartbeat. The wait felt like an eternity. Every second was a gamble, every sound a potential death knell. Suddenly, the PA system crackled to life, the static harsh and loud in the quiet corridor. "Code Silver. Lockdown in effect. All personnel remain in your designated areas. Security to the West Wing." The voice was calm, automated, and chilling. The hunters had triggered a lockdown. They weren't just searching anymore. They were sealing the exits. They were trapping them in the kill box. The elevator dinged. The sound seemed deafening, a bell tolling for them. As the heavy steel doors slid open, Sonia pushed the gurney inside, her muscles screaming with the effort. But before the doors could close, a heavy boot slammed into the gap. Sonia spun around, her hand diving into her pocket for the shears. She placed herself between the patient and the threat, her body a shield. One of the men from the lobby stood there. Up close, he was terrifyingly nondescript, a man you would forget the moment he left the room. But the suppressor already threaded onto his pistol was memorable. He wore a polite, dead smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nurse," the man said smoothly, raising the weapon with casual competence. "Step away from the asset. This doesn't concern you." Behind her, she heard Taeju shift. The metallic click of the gurney's brake being released echoed in the small space. He wasn't cowering. Even broken, even bleeding, he was preparing to spring. "It concerns me," Sonia said. Her voice shook, but her hand was steady on the handle of the shears. "When you bring a gun into my house..." She didn't attack him. She didn't have the training for that. Instead, she kicked the emergency stop, not on the elevator, but on the fire alarm panel mounted on the wall next to it. The klaxon screamed to life. A deafening roar of strobing light and noise filled the corridor. The assassin flinched, his eyes darting to the flashing light for a fraction of a second. It was enough. In that heartbeat of distraction, Sonia shoved the heavy crash cart she had dragged with them. She put her entire body weight into it, slamming the metal cart into the man's chest. He stumbled back, the gun firing wild into the ceiling, thwip, a suppressed cough of violence. The elevator doors groaned and shut, sealing them in the metal box. They were alive. But now they were trapped in a shaft with nowhere to go but down into the dark underbelly of the building. The descent was agonizingly slow. The elevator groaned as it lowered them into the bowels of the hospital. The red emergency strobe pulsed against the steel walls, turning the small cabin into a strobe cage of blood and metal. Flash. Dark. Flash. Dark. Sonia was on her knees beside the gurney before the doors even fully closed. Her hands flew over Taeju's abdomen. The collision with the cart had jarred him bad. Fresh, bright red blood was seeping through the hasty dressing, staining her gloved hands. "You tore the stitch," she hissed, her voice tight with frustration and fear. She pressed down hard, using her body weight to stem the flow. Taeju didn't wince. He just watched her. His eyes were glassy, feverish, but fixated on her face with an intensity that made the air feel thin. "Better the stitch than your throat," he murmured. His hand came up, weak and trembling, to grip her forearm. His skin was burning up. The fever of massive trauma was setting in faster than it should. "You saved me back there." "Why?" Sonia looked up, locking eyes with him. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her trembling, but his grip was a tether keeping her from falling apart. "Because I'm a nurse," she said, though the words felt insufficient for the violence she had just committed. "And because you looked like you were waiting for someone to finally be on your side." The elevator jolted to a halt at the sublevel. The morgue. The laundry. The boiler rooms. Hell. The doors slid open onto a cavernous, dimly lit corridor that smelled of industrial bleach, damp concrete, and old secrets. Sonia pushed the gurney out, the wheels echoing loudly on the cement floor. This was the circulatory system of the building, a maze of steam pipes and linen carts where the public never went. "We need a car," Sonia whispered, scanning the signage. "The waste management dock is at the end of the east tunnel. Trucks come in at 4 a.m. That's 10 minutes from now." Taeju tried to sit up, his movement ragged. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that terrified her. "They will know," he rasped. "The men upstairs. They are professionals. They will cover the exits. Leave me here. Hide yourself. If they find you with me, they won't hesitate." Sonia stopped the gurney. She grabbed his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. The contact was electric, a sudden breach of professional distance that felt inevitable. His skin was rough with stubble, hot with fever. "Listen to me, Taeju. I just assaulted a gunman and hijacked an elevator. I am already burned. There is no going back to my old life after tonight. The only way I survive this is if you survive this. We are leaving together." They moved deeper into the labyrinth. The temperature rose as they neared the boiler room. The air grew thick and humid, the hissing of the steam valves masking the sound of their movement. Sonia's mind was racing, calculating routes. She knew this basement better than the security team. She knew which doors jammed and which corridors were blind spots for the cameras. But she also knew that professionals didn't need maps. They needed lines of sight. Suddenly, Taeju's hand tightened painfully on her wrist. "Stop," he breathed. Sonia froze. At first, she heard nothing but the rhythmic clanking of the boilers. Then, she heard it. The distinct, wet crunch of a boot on a cockroach, followed by the soft sweep of fabric against a wall. They were close. Not behind them, but ahead. They had flanked the basement. Sonia looked around frantically. To their left was a heavy steel door marked biohazard storage, authorized personnel only. It was their only option. She keyed the code into the pad, her fingers slipping on the blood that coated her gloves. She shoved the gurney inside, the maglock engaging with a heavy thud just as a shadow detached itself from the darkness at the end of the hall. Inside the storage room, it was pitch black until the motion sensors triggered a low, amber safety light. The room was stacked with red plastic bins and yellow barrels. It was a tomb of hazardous waste. Sonia pushed the gurney behind a wall of stacked crates, sliding down to the floor beside Taeju. They were huddled in the cramped space, knees touching, the smell of antiseptic and iron enveloping them. Taeju's breathing was shallow, his energy fading fast. Sonia checked the wound again. The bleeding had slowed, but his pulse was thready. She pulled a saline bag from the crash cart she had dragged in, rigging a makeshift gravity drip by hanging it on a shelving unit. "Stay with me," she whispered, her hand resting on his chest to monitor the rise and fall. "Don't you dare quit on me now." Taeju turned his head, his cheek resting against her hand. The gesture was incredibly intimate, stripping away the context of the chase. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the touch. "You speak the language of the old families," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The code you used. The tiger does not hunt when the mountain burns. My father used to say that." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers in the amber light. "Who are you, Sonia?" "A nurse does not move like a soldier. A nurse does not know the codes of the underworld. I grew up in places where the lines between soldier and civilian were erased," Sonia answered softly, her thumb brushing the sweat from his temple. The moment was suspended in time, the threat outside the door forgotten for a heartbeat. There was a magnetic pull between them, born of survival and something deeper, a recognition of shared scars. Two damaged souls finding each other in the dark. "I learned that life is fragile," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "And that sometimes you have to break the rules to keep the flame burning." Taeju reached up, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, leaving a faint streak of his own blood on her skin like war paint. "You are dangerous," he murmured, a faint, appreciative smile touching his lips. "If we live, I will owe you a debt that cannot be paid with money." Sonia leaned in closer, their foreheads almost touching. The air between them was thick with unsaid things, a tension that was terrified and tender all at once. "If we live," she whispered back, "you can tell me why you have a dragon on your chest and a target on your back." The moment shattered with the sound of the electronic lock beeping. Beep, beep, beep. Someone was overriding the code. Sonia's head snapped toward the door. The red light on the panel turned green. "They're in," she breathed. Taeju's eyes hardened instantly. The lover vanished. The boss returned. He spotted a tray of surgical instruments on the crash cart Sonia had brought. He reached out, his hand shaking but his grip firm, and took a long, thin scalpel. "Get behind me," he ordered, trying to push himself upright despite the agony. Sonia pushed him back down. "No, you can't stand." She looked around wildly. She grabbed a canister of pressurized disinfectant spray from the shelf and a lighter she kept in her pocket for the smokers on the loading dock. It was a desperate, improvised weapon, but it was all she had. "Stay low," she commanded. The door swung open. The silhouette of a man with a raised weapon filled the frame. He stepped in, his weapon light cutting through the amber gloom like a lighthouse beam. "Clear left," a voice said into a radio. Sonia didn't wait. She screamed a raw, distractionary sound and hurled a heavy biohazard bin at the intruder. The man instinctively swung his weapon toward the motion, firing a suppressed shot that punched through the plastic. In that split second of realignment, Sonia triggered the lighter in front of the spray nozzle. A profound, roaring tongue of fire erupted across the small room. A makeshift flamethrower that engulfed the gunman's upper body. He shouted, flailing back into the hallway, blinding his partner behind him. The fire alarm shrieked even louder. "Move," Sonia yelled, grabbing the gurney. But Taeju was already moving. Adrenaline had flooded his system, overriding the shock. He rolled off the gurney, landing on his feet with a groan of exertion. He grabbed the dropped pistol from the floor where the burning man had fallen. His movements were fluid despite his injury. He fired 2 shots. Pop-pop controlled, precise double taps into the darkness of the corridor, suppressing the second shooter. "Go," he roared, grabbing Sonia's hand with his free one. He pulled her toward the rear exit of the room that led to the loading dock. "We are almost at the end, and my heart is racing. Can you feel that heat? Can you feel the fire?" Sonia isn't just a nurse anymore. She is a warrior. And Taeju? He just came back from the dead to protect her. If you are loving this intensity, if you are rooting for them to make it out alive, I need you to subscribe right now. We are building a family of survivors here. Comment below, would you have risked it all like Sonia? Let me know, and let's finish this together. They burst out into the cool, damp night air of the ambulance bay. The rain was falling in heavy sheets, washing away the smell of smoke and fear. The sudden drop in temperature made Sonia shiver, her scrubs soaked instantly. They were out. But they were exposed. A black sedan screeched around the corner, tires smoking on the wet pavement. Sonia flinched, pulling Taeju back, but he held his ground. "It's mine," he said, breathless, leaning heavily against the concrete wall. The window rolled down, revealing a driver with the same snake tattoo on his neck. The cavalry had arrived. But too late to save them inside, only just in time to extract them. Taeju turned to Sonia. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead. He looked at the open door of the car, then back at her. The sound of sirens was rising in the distance. Police. Fire. The real authorities. He couldn't be here when they arrived. And she couldn't be seen getting into that car. "You have to stay," Taeju said. The realization pained him more than the gunshot wound. "If you come with me, you never come back. You become a ghost. You lose everything." Sonia looked at the car. Then at the hospital where her life, her career, her identity lived. Then she looked at him. The connection was still there, burning brighter in the rain. She stepped closer, grabbing the lapels of his ruined shirt. "You're bleeding through the packing," she said, her voice choking up. "You need surgery." Taeju shook his head, a sad smile on his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a heavy silver ring engraved with a family crest, a dragon coiled around a mountain, stained with his blood. He pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers over it. "I have doctors who don't ask questions," he said softly. "But I don't have this." He leaned down. His forehead rested against hers for 1 second. A promise of intimacy that defied the chaos around them. "This isn't over, Sonia. When the mountain is cold, I will find you." He pulled away, sliding into the back seat of the sedan. The door slammed shut, severing the connection. The car sped off into the rainy night, taillights dissolving into the mist. Sonia stood alone in the ambulance bay, the rain mixing with the blood on her hands. The sirens were deafening now, blue and red lights bouncing off the wet pavement, sweeping over her. She looked down at her hand. The silver ring was cold and heavy against her skin. She clenched her fist tight around it, hiding it as the first police cruiser skidded to a halt in front of her. The taillights of the black sedan didn't just fade, they burned into the mist like dying embers, taking the only heat in Sonia's world with them. She was left standing in the vacuum of the ambulance bay, the rain hammering against her skin, freezing the blood, both hers and his, that stained her scrubs. She looked down at her hand. The silver ring was heavy, a cold weight against her palm. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a promise. It was a contract signed in adrenaline and survival. She clenched her fist tight around it, the metal biting into her skin, grounding her. She slid it deep into her pocket, her fingers lingering on the cool metal for a fraction of a second too long. She had to become a fortress now. The woman who trembled in the elevator was gone. The woman standing in the rain had to be made of iron. Sonia. The shout tore through the sound of the rain. Dr. Mercer burst through the automatic doors of the ER entrance, his lab coat flapping like a surrender flag in the wind. He spotted her standing by the pillar, drenched and motionless. My God, Sonia. Are you okay? He ran toward her, his eyes darting frantically around the empty bay. He wasn't looking at her injuries, he was looking for the patient. He was looking for the body. Where is he? Mercer demanded, stopping a few feet away, breathless. Where is the patient from trauma for? Sonia slowly raised her head. The rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't wipe it away. She stared at him, really seeing him for the first time tonight. She saw the sweat on his upper lip that had nothing to do with exertion. She saw the tremor in his hands. He's gone, Sonia said. Her voice was flat, hollowed out by shock, but underneath, there was a new, dangerous frequency. Gone. Mercer's voice spiked, cracking with panic. What do you mean, gone? He was critical. He couldn't walk. Did the men take him? Mercer stepped closer, invading her personal space. His eyes searched her face, looking for a story he could sell to the police who were pulling up to the curb, their sirens cutting into the night. He overpowered me, Sonia lied. The words tasted like ash, but they came out smooth. She pointed a trembling hand toward the dark service road that led away from the hospital. He woke up. He was stronger than he looked. He shoved me, and he ran into the dark. I couldn't stop him, doctor. I tried to hold him. Mercer stared at her. For a second, she thought he bought it. But then his gaze dropped. He looked at her hands. He looked at the smear of blood on her neck, Taeju's blood. And then, the moment of truth. Mercer didn't look relieved that she was alive. He looked terrified that she was. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a hiss that the approaching police wouldn't hear. Don't lie to me, Sonia. Those men, the ones inside, they didn't come here to arrest him. They came to erase him. Sonia went still. The rain seemed to stop. The world narrowed down to her and the man she had reported to for 3 years. How do you know that? She whispered. How do you know what they came to do? Mercer flinched, realizing his mistake. His eyes darted to the police cruisers, then back to her. A cruel, desperate sneer twisted his face. I know because peace has a price, Sonia, he spat, his facade of the caring doctor crumbling to reveal the coward underneath. And that man in trauma for? He was the cost of doing business in this city. You shouldn't have interfered. You have no idea what you've started. It hit her like a physical blow. The delay in the trauma room. The refusal to treat. The phone call she saw him making through the glass. He hadn't just been following protocol. He had sold Taeju out. The hunters hadn't found them by luck. Mercer had guided them in. He was the leak. You called them, Sonia said, the realization cold and absolute. You let them into the lockdown. I did what I had to do to protect this hospital. Mercer hissed, grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. And now you are going to keep your mouth shut. You're going to tell the police he went crazy and ran off. You didn't see any men in suits. You didn't see a gun. Do you understand me? Because if you say one word about what really happened, your nursing license won't be the only thing you lose. It was a threat. Plain and simple. The chief resident, the man sworn to save lives, was threatening to end hers. Before tonight, Sonia might have broken. She might have cried. She might have obeyed. But Sonia had just walked through fire. She had held the hand of a dragon. She had looked death in the face and set it on fire with a can of disinfectant. She looked down at Mercer's hand on her arm. Then she looked up into his eyes. And for the first time in her life, she let the mask fall. She let him see the darkness she had carried from the war zones, the steel she had forged in the basement. She didn't pull away. She leaned in. "Get your hand off me, doctor," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. Mercer blinked, stunned by the sudden shift in power. He let go as if he had been burned. "You think you're protecting this hospital?" Sonia continued, her voice devoid of fear. "You just made an enemy of the only thing in this city scarier than those men in suits. You think I am the loose end?" "No." She took a step toward him, forcing him back. "The man who left here tonight, he isn't going to forget who opened the door for his executioners. And he isn't going to forget who saved him." She patted her pocket, feeling the outline of the ring. "The crest of the dragon." "I suggest you worry less about my story," Sonia said, a cold, knowing smile touching her lips, "and more about what happens when the mountain stops burning. Because the tiger is coming back. And I don't think he's coming for a checkup." Mercer paled, the blood draining from his face. He stared at her, seeing the ghost of the man he had tried to kill reflected in her eyes. He realized then that he hadn't just lost a patient. He had created a witness who was under the protection of a monster. "Sonia," he stammered. "Go talk to the police, doctor," she said, brushing past him, walking toward the lights of the ER entrance. "I have a shift to finish." She walked away from him, her head high, the rain washing the last of the fear from her skin. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a keeper of secrets. She was a player in a game she hadn't asked to join, but one she was determined to win. As she crossed the threshold into the hospital, she felt the weight of the ring in her pocket again. It was heavy. It was dangerous. And it was hers. The monitors were still beeping. The gurneys were still rattling. The chaos of the ER continued as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The shadows seemed deeper now, hiding promises and threats. Sonia stopped at the nurse's station, picking up a pen. She looked at the empty trauma board where Taeju's name should have been. She didn't write John Doe. She didn't write Taeju. She simply drew a small, almost invisible symbol in the corner of the whiteboard. A coil. A mountain. A signal. She was ready. "You thought this was just a love story?" "No. This is a war, and Sonia just chose her side. The line has been drawn in blood, and there is no turning back. If your heart is pounding, if you need to know what Taeju does to the people who betrayed him, and if you are ready to see Sonia rise as the queen of this underworld, then you know what to do. This is Afro Soul Love Tales, where the romance is dark, the stakes are lethal, and the love is forever."